So let's say you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. We're here to take a look at a talk by Dan Biddle, who is going to go through his list of 7 myths about Genesis that he claims he will debunk. This seems to be a culmination of what's been a long-term project of his Genesis apologetics ministry. He's been working on the 7 Myths project for at least 6 years, with the first video I can find about it being made public on YouTube May 3rd, 2019. Biddle himself is one of the most obviously dishonest creationists that I have come across. He routinely strawmans science in ways that most professional creationists would be embarrassed to do. He's at about the flat earth level of just lying about what the conclusions of science are. But at the risk of spoiling what's to come, let's just let Biddle take it away.
Okay, so let's jump right in. We're going to start with our 7 myths tonight. We're going to start with number 5 because it's the one I want to front load with.
It's not a big deal, but if you want to start with number 5, then maybe you should have made that number 1 the whole time.
On Noah's flood. What I want you to do tonight is I'm going to bury you with dinosaur taphonomy.
I think I'll be able to keep up.
Dinosaur taphonomy is the study of how creatures are buried. If they were alive when they were buried, if they were dead, they were buried. What it looks like, the whole burial condition.
Well, that's what taphonomy is, essentially. It's the study of how things fossilize. Dinosaur taphonomy would presumably be the taphonomy of dinosaur fossils.
I'm going to spend a good few minutes on that topic. We're going to look at the dinosaur taphonomy, dinosaur fossil beds, and then I'm going to show you later how the flood is the most practical and likely explanation for how the dinosaurs got buried.
Well, given that most dinosaurs are preserved in rocks that could not have formed in a flood, that'll be interesting.
But I'm not going to just feed it to you. I'm not just going to give you my opinion straight out. I'm going to show you the evidence, and then hopefully the light bulb will come on with you guys as it did with me, because when I understood this, it blew me away. It was shocking to see really 2 things: how obvious it was that the dinosaurs were buried in Noah's flood, but the second thing that was just as amazing is how hard the world pushes to cover it up.
The weird thing is, I had the exact opposite experience. The scientific literature is full of evidence that precludes the flood as described in Genesis from being even physically possible. And far from being a cover-up, scientists who are not open and honest with their data tend to be ostracized. On the other hand, barely a day goes by when I can't find a creationist demonstrably lying about data or theory. In fact, based on my previous experience with just Dan, I think we'll see plenty of times where he tells half-truths or says things I can't reasonably explain in any way except that Dan is lying.
Because there are some things I'm going to go over and show you tonight that you're going to hit your head and just go, of course it had to be Noah's flood. I've been in places, you guys, in Canada, where as far as the eyes can see, 14 miles in Dinosaur Provincial Park, as far as your eyes can see, there are these hoodoos.
A hoodoo is a cone-shaped pillar of rock where the majority of the height is made up of a weak stone like volcanic tuff, or weakly cemented sandstone capped by a stronger material, such as basalt or strongly cemented sandstone, which protects the rest of the column from erosion. Nothing about them indicates that there was a flood, although their presence also does not preclude flooding during their initial deposition. Hoodoos are all different and can even form from glacial deposits, which are pretty darn common in southern Canada where Dinosaur Provincial Park is.
That are buried with not hundreds, not thousands, but tens of thousands of fleeing dinosaurs, ceratopsian dinosaurs, that they admit were buried by a huge, huge flood.
No, they don't, because the dinosaur-bearing strata of Dinosaur Provincial Park were deposited over the period of 1.5 million years, and no single flood lasts that long. But then most of the dinosaur bones are in the Dinosaur Park Formation. The lowest portions of it are fluvial, meaning river channels, and most of it is from an alluvial plain, that is a near-coastal floodplain. Now, a floodplain does not mean it was formed during some big flood. That's the term for the generally low-lying flat area of land near a river. If the water level rises, then yes, they can and do flood, although then it usually is a fairly slow and low-energy event, much unlike the flooding that the Noah story would require, although it will still trap some animals and cause a large number of them to die and possibly fossilize. Further, the formation is full of things like root traces, cross-bedded sandstone, and multiple layers of low-grade coal with in-situ roots. This cannot form in a single flood. It requires decades, if not centuries, of rivers meandering, overspilling, forests growing and dying and growing back. Further, the majority of the rocks are fine-grain mudstone, fine-grain sandstone, and medium-grain sandstone. They are not graded, and there is little to no conglomerate or turbidite as would be required for a catastrophic burial. Other than the word floodplain, there is nothing to connect the Dinosaur Park Formation with Noah's Flood.
They say it started as a tropical storm.
Who said that? Where? I'd love a citation on this.
But these creatures are buried under 50 feet of mud as far as your eyes can see. Herds upon herds of ceratopsian dinosaurs, but they're buried with marine life.
No, they aren't. The Dinosaur Park Formation is entirely freshwater, including salamanders, frogs, garfish, sturgeons, paddlefish, and groups of known freshwater mollusks, as well as numerous crocodilians, which as a group are primarily freshwater animals. Now, above the Dinosaur Park Formation is the Bear Paw Formation, which does have marine organisms, as well as a much smaller number of dinosaurs. And at least one genus that I know of is found in both, Daspletosaurus. But this isn't the formation with the big bone beds. So while there are bone beds full of dinosaurs that probably died in a flood, it's not all one flood because one flood cannot explain the formation. And while there are marine animals, they're in entirely different strata from the bone beds, and in rocks that cannot be flood deposited. Instead, the flood deposited rocks have freshwater animals, which makes sense given the fluvial and alluvial context of the formation.
All mixed up together. And you have to think, how much higher did the water have to be to deposit 50 feet of mud on top of these dinosaurs over multiple miles?
Not very high, because the formation cannot have been deposited in a single flood, so each individual flood that occurred only added a small portion to the total depth of the formation as a whole. And again, we can tell because of, among other things, the numerous parallel coal beds which require the plant matter that made them up to have grown, been buried, then for a new plant-heavy ecosystem to develop on top of the older ones. This takes years to decades.
Let's start here. These are some Jurassic creatures.
Well, the dinosaur park fossils are from the Campanian stage of the late Cretaceous, not the Jurassic, so I guess we're switching topics now.
So these are Allosaurus. We've all seen these creatures as kind of a cousin to a T-Rex.
First, that's not a paleontological reconstruction of Allosaurus. That's the Allosaurus model from the video game Ark Survival Evolved, which intentionally uses inaccurate but cool dinosaurs, and then changes their species names because they're not supposed to be the actual fossil species, but new ones evolved from them. This is like showing Sonic the Hedgehog during a lecture about mammal evolution. Further, calling Allosaurus a cousin to T-Rex is, I suppose, not wrong, but it's about as far away from T-Rex as it can be while still being a tetanurine, which is the group that includes almost every theropod you've ever heard of, except Ceratosaurus and the Abelisaurs like Carnotaurus. But then, is he admitting that Allosaurus and T-Rex have a common ancestor? Because that's a whole heck of a lot more evolution than creationists normally accept.
Keep a quick look here on the buttons that you see on the screen. These are all the fossil beds where they found this species of dinosaur, Allosaurus.
Allosaurus is a genus, not a species. Also, this graphic is generated by the PaleoDB Navigator. It's a really cool resource for finding out where fossils have been found. You can produce this image by just going to the Navigator and searching for Allosaurus. Allosaurus happens to be an almost absurdly abundant paleotaxon in the Morrison Formation, so there will be lots of dots indicating finds. But also know that the large dots indicate multiple finds, but zooming in on them will often cause them to resolve into multiple smaller dots. Since he grabbed these slides, the website has changed the watercolor to light blue, which I do not like, but oh well.
So all these little dots here are usually not one or two, sometimes they're dozens, sometimes they're massive fossilized bone beds.
Yeah, on the website in general that is true, but it's not generally true for Allosaurus.
But right here in the middle of America, we can see all of these dots representing where this species has been found.
Genus, but yeah. And really, go check out the PaleoDB Navigator. It's the first source linked in the description. It's really, really cool.
Now let's take a look at the sauropods, and instantly you should see some.
It's weird that we're going to a giant clade after focusing on a genus. But the really confusing thing is how this is supposed to tie into a flood. It's not like finding fossils localized to a certain region isn't expected by science. For one thing, organisms usually don't have global distribution, so we should not expect most paleotaxa to have one either. But further, not every place will have surviving sediment from the time a certain taxon lived. So we can only find fossils in a subset of the range they actually inhabited. On the other hand, floods jumble things up and carry them outside their normal range, so in a global flood, we should not find tight distributions for taxa. They should be scattered fairly randomly.
See something similar going on. we have Allosaurus, then we have sauropods. The dots really don't change places, do they?
Actually, they do if you zoom out. Look, here's a wider view of the maps for just Allosaurus and all of Sauropoda. They're not the same, and you can see that sauropod fossils are far more widespread, which makes sense since it's many, many genera, whereas Allosaurus is just one genus. But further, you can also see that many of the dots are green or yellowish-green. That indicates that unlike all the blue dots of Allosaurus, many of these sauropods are actually from the Cretaceous, which means they did not live with Allosaurus. What's actually happening is that you're looking at a part of the former USA that has a lot of Mesozoic rock, whereas most of it does not have so much. Eastern North America is mostly much older rock from the Paleozoic, which is why West Virginia and Pennsylvania have basically no dinosaur fossils at all. The west of North America is mostly younger volcanic rock that resulted from the orogeny that created the Rockies, but west of the Mississippi and east of the Rockies, most of the Mesozoic rocks are still there, and they're full of fossils of Mesozoic fauna, of which the dinosaurs were a major component, and basically the only terrestrial megafauna apart from pterosaurs.
We're looking at a kill zone, something that happened that buried all of the Allosaurus are here, and all the sauropods in America that are in the Jurassic layers are here.
That's a hypothesis, but we can test that easily. In fact, we don't have to go farther than just PaleoDB to test it. Here are the PaleoDB maps for dinosaur fossils across the former USA for the Triassic, then the Jurassic, then the Cretaceous. One thing you might notice is that there are a lot of Cretaceous dinosaurs, far more than the Jurassic and Triassic. Well, that's mostly because the Cretaceous is much more recent, so less of it has had time to wear away and be ground into sand and dust. But also, it means that all of these dinosaurs are at different levels in the rocks, and have different taphonomic environments, from the desert of the Morrison Formation where Allosaurus is found, to the swampy nearshore rivers where Tyrannosaurus is found, to the Cretaceous beach preserved in places like Texas and Georgia, where we find amazing footprints. No single event can account for all of these different depositional environments, and the events that can account for them are not at all floods, nor is there any reason to suppose that all these animals died in the same event. If a single event killed all these animals in Central North America, then they should all be in a single formation, and all have the same taphonomy. Neither of these things is true.
Stegosaurus, same thing.
Yes, there's no surprise that another American Jurassic dinosaur is found where there are Jurassic rocks in North America.
And then we have all three together. Look what happens. We have this one, this one, this one, and we put them all together. Something happened where these creatures were killed rather instantly and buried catastrophically.
A simple map can't tell you that. You would need to actually examine where they were buried and what kind of rock it was, and what kind of time gap existed between them. And while, of course, the radiometric dating of these rocks is quite accurate, even if we did not have it, we would know it could not have been that all these animals died in a single catastrophe, because we know the maximum deposition rates and minimum lithification times for these strata. Just looking purely at the geology and the physics would put our minimum estimate for the Mesozoic at hundreds of thousands of years to form, and that's pretending that the duration for all unconformities is just 0. The thing is, we've already checked on all this, and there simply is no way to get all these fossils to be plausibly killed in one event.
Because there's no good reason that the sauropod would go cuddle up next to a stegosaurus to go get buried over long periods of time.
I mean, that's true, but then we don't actually have any records of a cuddling stegosaurus and sauropod. But they do tend to be buried in the same layer when they live together in the same environment at the same time. And of course, Dan isn't exactly citing the cuddling dinosaurs paper, although if he did, it would be kind of adorable. And there are cuddling animal fossils, or at least ones that look like it. The fossil of a Thrinaxodon and a Brumastega cuddled into a burrow from the Triassic made international headlines. You'd think spooning sauropods would too.
Some kill event happened and buried these creatures in their tracks.
Cool hypothesis, for which so far we've been given no evidence. Man, it's almost like Dan was full of shit and engaged in a false tu quoque when he said that scientists were hiding information and covering up the truth. So far, that seems a whole lot more like what he's doing.
And we find tracks in the middle of America in a place called the Dinosaur Peninsula.
You'll probably be unsurprised to know that the term Dinosaur Peninsula was, as near as I can tell, invented by creationist Timothy Clary, who has also been covered on this channel. Unless, of course, Dan got it from episode 21 of Battle Fever J. The third installment of the Tokusatsu series, Super Sentai, which is titled Kyoryuhanto e Totsugeki, or Assault the Dinosaur Peninsula. This is not something that anyone in any scientific field recognizes as a term in paleontology. Indeed, there's also no reason to think that this area was ever a peninsula. Rather, it was actually often the opposite, an inland sea. Who knows, maybe Dan is really just a secret tokusatsu fan.
Where we know they made their last stand, where they were up running on dry, wet ground, making imprints before they finally bought it at the zenith of the flood.
Dry, wet ground, eh? Let me go dig a deep, shallow hole and fill it with cold, hot water. Further, we don't know any such thing about some last stand of the dinosaurs. That's a claim. It's a hypothesis at best. We don't know that, and in fact, we know it's not true, because the Mesozoic strata of North America simply are not made of strata that are largely explicable by flooding at all, and which absolutely preclude deposition in a single event. Just the multiple coal seams and associated soil horizons remove this from the realm of possibility, because they require successive ecosystems full of plants and attendant animals to grow from seed, die, be buried, and then be established again. Now, if Bodhi wants to say that it was actually a miracle of rapid plant growth, then sure, fine, but at that point, why bother with looking at any evidence, when any counter-evidence is just hand-waved away with a miracle? Once you do that, it means you openly don't care about evidence. Biddle, it seems, would prefer to not care about evidence on the down low. If you care about evidence, and a YouTuber who cares about it too, I would encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Both are free and reversible, and both are a big help to the channel.
So this is just something about dinosaurs, but now let's look at the big picture.
No, it's not even a thing about dinosaurs. It's just some nonsense people who think of evidence as an obstacle to overcome, rather than as something to learn from, came up with in order to shoehorn some evidence into their narrative while ignoring most of it.
And this is the amazing part.
I hope everyone is sitting down for this. Brace yourselves.
These are all the fossils plotted out in America that are in the Cretaceous and Jurassic layers, which are the dinosaur-bearing layers that are all across America.
Yeah, I guess the Triassic dinosaurs of North America just don't count.
And we obviously see a pattern here. Not too many here on the west coast, on the sides of the continent over here, but my gosh, do we have a massive kill zone right here in the middle of America.
This is like going to a human cemetery and wondering what kind of horrific event could have killed all these people. The fact that you have a lot of bodies in one place does not mean all of them died in the same event. I honestly don't know why this is necessary to point out, but apparently, with this nitwit, it is. Now, could a single event explain lots of bodies? Well, yeah, and so the next step is to check to see if they're the same age. And we don't even need radiometric dating. Just stratigraphy is more than enough to tell us that they cannot be the same age, as just the deposition and lithification of the Mesozoic strata in the middle of North America would take hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions. Granted, not as long as we know they actually took to form, but far, far longer than Dan's timeline would allow for.
In fact, it stretches 1,800 miles by 1,000 mile wide, and it's about 1 million square miles.
Is this just about to be a big number, therefore God argument?
Now, this is the best we can do graphically to show it to you, but you really have to think, what would it look like if you got in a helicopter, parked yourself in the middle of this bullseye, and just started flying up, watching the flood as it happened, or watching these dinosaurs, or even without the flood, just looking at the huge expanse of why on earth is the middle of America, like a bathtub, literally stuffed with millions upon millions of dinosaurs, but secondly, why are they mixed with marine life?
Because the Mesozoic rock in other parts of the continent are gone, and because at various times the area was under a number of shallow inland seas, which can be seen by various low-energy shallow marine deposits, like tidally cross-bedded sandstone, marine shales, etc.
Shark teeth, oysters, clams, fish, all kinds of creatures are sandwiched in this magical kill zone in the middle of America.
Yes, all through the Mesozoic water levels fluctuated, and as a result we have marine deposits. Weird how he doesn't tell you about the terrestrial deposits that don't have any marine organisms, like the TooManyDemons Formation or the Morrison Formation, both of which have only land organisms and freshwater organisms. Isn't that odd? Did the flood take a break a few times to develop freshwater habitats? How did that work?
And when we open their bones, we find things like this. Here's a Triceratops horn that's been demineralized. It still has soft, flexible biomatter inside of it.
As I have pointed out many times, this is from the work of Mark Armitage. And the problem with Mark Armitage's paleontology is that he basically has no understanding of provenance. He did not document exactly where he found his bones. He did not take sufficient in situ photographs. Nor did he actually tell us what analysis he did to decide that the bones were Triceratops. As a result, everything he says just comes down to, trust me, bro. Now, I have spoken to the landowner on whose ranch he was digging, and she does believe that it was a Triceratops. So basically, I don't have any way to even assess Armitage's work. I will say that the location is full of Pleistocene alluvium, which has been known to contain bison horns, and historically Triceratops horns have been confused for the horns of the extinct species Bison latifrons.
This is just one of 16 types of materials that holds it together. There's probably some collagen left in here, maybe some keratin. But just over the last 50 years, there's been 122 peer-reviewed science journals that have revealed not a dozen, but 16 different types of bioorganic materials found inside of dinosaur bones that are supposedly millions of years old.
Yup.
The last two things that they just found were nerve cells and cartilage.
While the nerve cell thing is a bit iffy, it's not clear yet if what was found was actually the biological remains of neurons or if it was the material that had replaced the neurons while maintaining their shape. And of course, the cartilage was in fact decayed and no longer cartilage as we would find it in a living animal. But that last part is true for all these things. We aren't opening up dinosaurs to find intact hemoglobin, cartilage, keratin, or collagen. We're finding stable decay products of these things. On the other hand, we do find intact biomolecules in more recent fossils like those of mammoths. So why don't we find them intact in dinosaurs? Well, precisely because they're much older.
Not impressions of cartilage or impressions of nerve cells, actual dinosaur nerve cells and actual dinosaur cartilage are found in these dinosaurs.
Again, no, not really. The cartilage was actually from the dinosaur, but it's not really cartilage anymore. And the nerve cells are still a bit iffy as to what exactly they were, but I'm happy for them to actually be primarily composed of original biomatter.
And it's really rocking the field of paleontology because they can't explain it within their time frame. Because they have to have 66 million years between today and the dinosaurs.
Actually, in most cases, it's a lot more than just 66 million years. Biddle seems to forget or just ignore this a lot, but non-avian dinosaurs existed for more than 170 million years. We have soft tissue remnants from a lot of that period.
So if this stage was 66 feet long and I were to pace it off 66 feet here, one of these materials is called collagen.
Biddle knows he can finish his thoughts, right? But yeah, collagen is one of the things that is the source of soft tissue remnants found in some dinosaur fossils. But that brings up a couple of things we need to talk about. The first is just what the heck collagen is. Collagen is like the glue of the animal kingdom. Collagen is characteristic of the whole kingdom of Animalia. It is a protein that has the form of a triple helix and is extremely strong. It is also susceptible to a phenomenon called cross-linking. That's where cartilage strands link to each other. This is not something that normally happens in life, but it can be induced by certain chemical processes. One of the chemicals that you might be familiar with that can induce collagen cross-linking is formaldehyde. The whole reason why formaldehyde keeps the physical structure of animals largely intact is that it induces cross-linking. Once collagen is sufficiently cross-linked, it can stay in that form basically indefinitely. The second thing we have to discuss is that the collagen found in these fossils is in fact cross-linked, which means there is no particular period after which we should expect it to have decayed away. Further, one of the other things that can cause collagen cross-linking is the presence of sufficient iron. Unsurprisingly, iron can indeed occur naturally and is also found inside bones normally in life because bones have a blood supply.
And there's been 5 different studies that have looked at the shelf life of collagen, and the maximum shelf life that the evolutionary scientists are willing to give it is 900,000 years.
No, he's just wrong here. Chemicals don't just have a shelf life or a half-life or whatever. The stability of chemicals is a complex interplay of the structure of the chemical, the pressure, the temperature, and the other chemicals present. You can come up with a decay rate for a chemical under particular circumstances, but that rate will change if the circumstances change. For example, a lump of aluminum will last a very long time if you leave it on your desk. But put it in some acid to remove the oxide on the outside of the aluminum, and then put a bit of mercury on it, and it will quickly amalgamate, and your lump of aluminum will become a brittle pile of strands of mercury amalgam covered in aluminum oxide. So what's the shelf life for aluminum? Well, it's somewhere between a few minutes and infinity, depending on the circumstances. The same is true for collagen. In the right circumstances, it can last more or less forever. In other circumstances, it'll be gone in a few millennia. Creationists seem to love to pretend that processes for which we have very good measurements that cannot really vary, such as the propagation of light or the rate of spontaneous nuclear decay, can just vary wildly for no particular reason other than that it would be convenient for them if they could. On the other hand, to look at things that very obviously can vary wildly, given different circumstances, and even that have been measured to vary, such as the recession rate of the moon, the rate of erosion, the rate of change in the dipole moment of Earth's magnetic field, and yes, the decay of biomolecules, and pretend that they are set in stone as immovable constants of the universe. Creationists just completely invert how variable processes in nature are. It's almost like, in order for creationism to be true, you have to invert the basic ways in which the universe operates. I would say that on its own is a good reason to dismiss creationism.
They're saying with 5 different studies, the longest that collagen can possibly last in a dinosaur bone is less than 1 million years.
Wrong.
And just going to a museum with specimens in formaldehyde is enough to know that's wrong. Further, if you ever cook meat, you'll also know that's wrong. One of the toughest cuts of beef is brisket, and this is specifically because it has a lot of collagen. But if you're familiar with, say, Texas-style barbecue, you probably think of brisket as so tender it can melt in your mouth. That's because by the time barbecue brisket is ready to eat, basically all of the collagen is gone. So how did it disappear? Did someone put the brisket on a shelf for 9,000 years? No, obviously not. It's just slow cooked. The higher temperature and lack of anything to cause the collagen to cross-link means that the collagen break apart faster than it would at room temperature. Just cooking some nice brisket is enough to know that the decay rate of collagen is highly variable. So we know of ways to both speed up and slow down the decay of collagen. The decay rate of biomolecules is just not a fixed value. There is no way to notice that a particular biomolecule or its decayed remnants are present in a fossil, and thereby assign a maximum age to that fossil on that basis alone. In fact, iron cross-linking is one of the major explanations for how these organic molecules are preserved. There are also many other hypotheses that have been suggested, so really, far from having no clue, we're spoiled for choice when it comes to plausible explanations for this phenomenon.
So they get one step, but all these other steps of 66 million years going across, they have to punt. They throw up their hands and they say, we can't explain within our evolutionary time frame how these bioorganic soft tissue materials are still in these dinosaur bones. So when it comes to dinosaur taphonomy, that's yet one more thing we have to consider. Here's a list of the 122 peer-reviewed science journals that have established soft tissue within dinosaurs. Now, this is over all creatures in general. 50 of these articles deal specifically with dinosaurs.
Neat!
Now, they used to try to start explaining it away. They would actually say, well, the collagen that we find in dinosaur bones might be because the technician that was doing the analysis was wearing compound face makeup that fell and contaminated the sample.
Yeah, contamination happens. Like a lot. And I'm pretty darn confident that more than one someone has found something in a thin section slide of a fossil that was in fact contamination. But enough work has been done on the topic of preserved biomolecules in Mesozoic fossils that while contamination does explain some of it, it is far from all of it, and currently the consensus is that often such molecules are intrinsic to the fossil. But also, the contamination is not always, or even very often, from makeup. It's more often things like shed skin, bacteria, fungal spores, mites, etc. In fact, I haven't actually heard of makeup-based contamination, which probably means it's uncommon compared to other kinds of contamination, although I suppose it probably does happen. Perhaps workers in labs where contamination is a possibility shouldn't wear makeup. I don't know. I don't run those labs.
But then they found, no, that wasn't the cause. Well, maybe some bird died on top of the T-Rex and leached its collagen into the dinosaur bone.
Wouldn't that still make it Mesozoic dinosaur collagen? Like, what am I missing?
Then they threw out that sample.
What does that mean? Does that mean that the collagen really was from a bird and then they decided that wasn't cool enough? I have no idea what he's trying to communicate right now.
In 2019, they published a study where they revealed that the collagen that they're finding inside these dinosaur bones is organic to the creature at the molecular level.
Organic to the creature at the molecular level isn't a thing that means anything. That's just gibberish. I get that he's trying to say intrinsic to the fossilized organism, but yeah, it's very obvious that Dan does not know the absolute basics of the topic. He's just using big words to pretend he's smart. I really can't emphasize enough that no one who knows what they're talking about when it comes to anything to do with biology or chemistry would say the phrase, organic to the creature at the molecular level. Dan is a fraud. He doesn't even have the knowledge you might expect of someone who paid attention in science class in high school.
So it's case closed. They're finding collagen in dinosaur bones, and that's the second thing they're saying is, yeah, it can't last more than 1 million years.
Except that they're not saying that. Because for one thing, we know based on experiment that there are ways to make collagen, or rather remnants of it, because that's what's actually being found, last more or less indefinitely, and because it obviously is lasting millions of years. Let's be clear about what our options are when it was discovered that the remnants of collagen were found in Mesozoic dinosaur bones. Option 1 is that we are fundamentally wrong about chemistry, biology, geology, nuclear physics, relativity, particle physics, classical physics, fluid flow, and almost anything else in science you can name. And in fact, these bones are only 4,000 to 5,000 years old. Option 2 is that there's some chemistry we don't know about going on. I don't think it should be a surprise to anyone that option 1 wasn't even really considered, and it turns out that option 2 was correct.
So it absolutely shrinks the time frame of these dinosaurs, and it lines with Noah's flood.
Actually, it doesn't shrink the time frame for the fossils at all, as I think I've explained ad nauseum. But even if it did, it wouldn't particularly align with Noah's flood. What it would do is not be incompatible with Noah's flood on its own. It would certainly be a problem for the standard explanation of these fossils. But this is not a dichotomy. It's not the story supported by evidence and accepted by the scientific consensus or Christian young earth creationism. There are a lot of other options, essentially infinite options. So while if Dan were correct, it would be a problem for the theory of evolution as it is currently understood, as well as a problem for geology and basically all other fields of science, it would actually not be positive evidence for most of what young earth creationism says is true about the history of the world.
Now let's look at the Morrison Formation, which I showed you before. We have a 1 million mile swath of land in the middle of America that has all those dead dinosaurs.
The circumference of the Earth is just under 25,000 miles. You physically can't ever be farther than about 12,500 miles from anything on Earth. So you can't have a 1 million mile swath of anything. He probably meant square miles, but he didn't say that. And you might think I'm being nitpicky, and honestly I am, but it's all just building up the picture that Dan is completely incompetent. He doesn't know the difference between miles and square miles. The only thing Dan has is his ability to pronounce big words, but he even lacks the ability to use them correctly.
Let's look at just the Morrison Formation, which is a Jurassic formation that's about 600,000 miles right in the middle of that pocket in America.
It's also basically my hometown, in case you didn't know. I'm a Ceratosaurus nasicornis, not a Tyrannosaurus rex as is often believed, and Ceratosaurus is from the Morrison Formation. The Morrison formed in mostly arid conditions and contains numerous dinosaur taxa, although nearly all of them are quite large. It's thought that the formation has a taphonomic bias for large bones, although as far as I know, it's not clear why. The formation is also particularly high in volcanic ash, which makes dating the various members of the formation particularly easy, compared to most other fossil-bearing rock. The ash is from the Independence Dike Swarm, a series of volcanic fissures in what is now California, which were active in the Jurassic. Despite this, very little of the formation has enough ash to be even classified as tufaceous, and little, if any of it, is actually tuff, or rock formed from airborne volcanic ash. It seems that the volcanism was relatively constant, but not very high in intensity.
Here's what it looks like. We're going to zoom into Morrison, Colorado, and we're going to take a cross-sectional cut of what this huge area looks like. I want you to picture what we just zoomed into is a 13-state region that's 600,000 miles, square miles, and it's 300 feet thick.
And it is composed in part of limestone, which definitely did not deposit during a global flood, since that's physically impossible in a way cross-linked collagen fibers persisting is not.
So imagine a pancake that's 300, it's a football field tall, but it spans for 600,000 miles, stretching over 13 states.
So calling it a pancake gives the impression that the Morrison Formation is homogeneous throughout its extent. It is not. It is made of many kinds of rock in various places, including sandstone, mudstone, limestone, and siltstone. I'm not sure if implying homogeneity was Dan's goal in calling it a pancake, but I just wanted to make sure that it's not the impression anyone got. One group of people who know all about pancakes and are especially adept at making them, as well as telling when rocks are not pancakes, are my patrons and channel members. My Patreon is linked in the description, and there's a join button to join the channel as a member right below this video. The Patreon starts at $1 a month, and the membership's at $1.99 a month. You can get a 15% discount for pledging annually on Patreon, and both channel members and patrons get early access to videos like this, as well as access to my super secret Discord server.
That's what we're looking at here in the cross-section of the Morrison Formation that's filled with every known species of Jurassic dinosaurs found in America. Every one, about 52 species, are sandwiched in this layer.
So that's only true if you restrict it to dinosaur body fossils. And even then, it's not technically true, it's just mostly true. If ichnofossils count, which I would argue they do, we also have theropod dinosaurs from the Jurassic in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New York, none of which are known from the Morrison. But basically, what Dan is saying is identical to the Morrison Formation is the only Jurassic formation in the continental former United States with dinosaur body fossils, which is mostly true. I just don't know why it's remarkable.
Somehow they all bought it at the same time. It's 300 feet thick.
That it's 300 feet thick is a good indication that these dinosaurs did not die at the same time. And in fact, they did not. In fact, the Morrison Formation records approximately 10 million years of sedimentation, evolution, and erosion. And even if we couldn't know this with things like radiometric dating, we can still tell it couldn't all have happened at once. The Morrison Formation has preserved lake beds, soil layers, rivers, floodplains, etc. That's not something a single flood can produce.
So we can shrink a 747 and put that down just to see what the size comparison's like. And we can imagine this amount of mud, this thick mud pancake stretching across 13 states is a pretty big region.
It's a pretty big region, but calling it just a bunch of mud is incredibly inaccurate. Some of it is indeed mudstone, but most of it is not. It would probably be more convenient for flood geology if it were, though, so I get why he says that.
Put in the Empire State Building, it covers a lot of it at the bottom. It's a scale comparison. It's really amazing.
Is it? It's just what happens when you get 10 million years of more or less continuous deposition. It gets thick with 3 C's.
All of these dinosaur species that you see in this image are found in the Morrison Formation, 13 states. They're all dead, and they're all there at the same time.
No, they're all over the span of 10 million years. Dan hasn't even tried to argue that they were all at the same time. But also, I counted 38 species on that slide, although I counted every individual as a separate species, which I suspect is not the case, as there seem to be at least 4 animals that all look like Stegosaurus stenops, although the formation does have other Stegosaurus species, so maybe that's what they're representing. I checked the Wikipedia list of dinosaurs in the Morrison Formation, and they had 33 species listed, so yeah, I doubt very much that each pictured animal is supposed to represent an individual species, but I'm not sure what the takeaway is supposed to be. 36 dinosaurs is not a huge number. What should we have expected?
What could do that?
Dinosaurs living their lives, eating, hunting, foraging, mating, hatching, dying, all over the course of 10 million years as the environment slowly shifted around them, resulting in lakes, streams, wadis, sand dunes, etc.
And when you start realizing this stuff, you think, my gosh, I don't even care anymore what the secularists are explaining, because anybody who can use sound reasoning can walk up to this and say, you can't explain that over a slow death process over millions of years, because they're all found sandwiched in the same layer. This whole, this gigantic family of dinosaurs with ankylosaurs and theropods and admonosaurus and sauropods, all these creatures are found buried in that 300-foot thick man cake.
Why? What about the Morrison Formation indicates that it had to form all at once? Notice that he hasn't even given an argument. It's just been incredulity. He doesn't think you can deposit 300 feet of sediment over 10 million years because, well, because nothing. He just thinks it can't be done. That's on average a depositional rate of 0.0012 inches per year. Is that too fast? Too slow? What's the actual problem? So far, it seems like the actual problem is that it just doesn't jive with his theology. But that's a problem for his theology, not science. Science doesn't care about his theology, and neither do I really, except that he's advocating for anti-science nonsense, and that's the kind of thing that gets people killed and helps with the rise of fascism. I don't like either of those things, so I guess in that sense, I care about his theology.
They have over 1,700 fossil bone beds.
No, it's occurrences. A random isolated carpal bone is an occurrence. That's not bone beds. Bone beds implies a concentration of bones, and while those do exist in the Morrison, he's conflating that with any time a bone is found. If he weren't so stupid, I'd assume he's lying. But this is the man who doesn't know the difference between miles and square miles, so he might not be lying. He might actually just be this stupid.
37 different genera.
See what I mean? Genre is spelled G-E-N-R-E. He's looking at the word genera, spelled G-E-N-E-R-A, which is the plural of the word genus. Now, to be fair, genre is in fact etymologically derived from genus. But still, they're not the same word, and he's looking at the spelling of the word. Also, I only found 33, but I'm fine with it being 37. It could be 67, and I'm not sure what the point would be, or how it would change anything.
364 species of plants.
This guy can't even read his own slide. That's plants and animals, which means includes all of those dinosaur genera, many of which have multiple species. But also, so what? What is the significance of that number? What number should we expect if science is right versus if creationism is right? What do I do with that number? Is it just big number, therefore God? He's not even making that claim. I have no idea what the audience is supposed to get from this. If you know, put it in the comments.
And that's just what we found so far.
Yep, that's at least true.
They've actually estimated that they've only uncovered maybe 20% of what they think is actually in the Morrison Formation.
Yeah, a big reason for that is that the vast majority of it is deep under the prairies of North America. Generally, paleontologists only get access to the surface, so while the Morrison Formation extends all over the place, the surface outcrops of it just take up a tiny fraction of its total area. Chances are, what is not exposed also contains just as many fossils as what is exposed, and chances are that that includes heretofore unknown species of all sorts of types, including dinosaurs. But again, so what? What difference does this make? How does this lead us to a flood conclusion?
So there's a huge pancake of these creatures here in the middle of America.
Whoops, that's not the Morrison Formation. That's the whole of the Mesozoic. Here's the map he's showing. Here's the map if we restrict it to just the Morrison. Not at all the same map, is it? And the thing is, here I think he knows he's lying. He had to click on Mesozoic as a time filter to generate this map. I know because I had to do it to reproduce it. But he knows because he said earlier that the Morrison is Jurassic. And he also knows because he said that there were dinosaurs in the Cretaceous. And when you click Mesozoic, the map is very clear that it includes the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. So yeah, at this point it's really hard for me to say Dan is being honest here.
What on earth could put them there?
Them having lived there. It's like asking what on earth could have put me in my house. I don't know. I live there.
So there it is again, 1,800 miles long. It's actually encompassing 3 countries.
Except that what he's showing is not at all the Morrison Formation. It includes many other formations like the TooManyDemons Formation, the Hell Creek Formation, the Lance Formation, and many others. He's just lying here when he pretends that what he's showing is a single geological structure.
Million square miles. There's what it looks like in Montana. That's where they found the largest T-Rex.
T-Rex is a dinosaur from the end Cretaceous. It's found in Montana in the Hell Creek Formation, not the Morrison Formation. What are we even doing here?
And they say, well, it must have been an asteroid that fell down right here that killed off all these dinosaurs.
Nope, no one has ever said that. Non-avian dinosaurs were around for almost 180 million years. No one has ever suggested that they all died in the asteroid impact that happened at the end of that period. In fact, almost none of the dinosaur fossils we have even could have died in that impact. Virtually all of them are from hundreds of thousands to tens of million years too old. This is like saying that every Roman who ever lived died during the fall of Rome from Romulus and Remus right down to Romulus Augustulus in 476 CE.
But if you run a simulation and you drop the Chicxulub asteroid here, look at where this simulation shows the water's going to go. It's going to cover some parts of the southern areas of America, but it's not going to kill this 600,000 square foot area.
Yep, that's true, and it's probably one of the reasons why no one has ever thought the asteroid that hit the coast of the Yucatan caused the fossils that had already been deposited millions of years before it hit. Really, I think if Dan ever found himself in a graveyard, he'd wonder what horrible disaster could have killed so many people at once. And no, he would not notice the dates on the graves indicating that these people died individually over the course of centuries.
Yet every time you go into any secular museum, they're going to say, oh, the Chicxulub asteroid did it. The Chicxulub asteroid did it on the southern tip of Mexico, on the Yucatan Peninsula.
Right, but what's the it that they're talking about? Because it sure isn't causing every single dinosaur fossil in North America. It's killing off the majority of species that were alive at the end of the Cretaceous, including all but 4 groups of dinosaurs: the paleonates, the groundfowl, the waterfowl, and the neoaves, which together we call birds. To keep with the graveyard analogy, suppose you found a graveyard largely abandoned in the woods. It has dates from 1620 all the way until 1810. Also, the number of graves from 1808 through 1810 are significantly higher and have more very young people. You might conclude that something caused the end of whatever community had been using this graveyard, and that by 1810 the community was essentially extinct. That seems like a very probable conclusion. But you can't say that the graves from 1620 through, say, 1800, the vast majority of the times this community existed, were also caused by this event that started sometime around 1808. It's the same with the dinosaur fossils. We have dinosaur fossils across an approximately 170 million year time span, or much longer if we include birds. But Dan isn't, so I won't for now. Something happened at the end of that period that caused most dinosaurs to disappear from the record. But that thing didn't cause almost any of the actual dinosaur fossils, almost all of which are from long before that event, which we now are very confident included the Chicxulub impact.
But it really doesn't make a good explanation because it's only coming up, feet and meters over here in the southern areas. It's not going to kill dinosaurs in Montana or Canada. Something else had to do that.
Similarly, a plague in 1808 is a bad explanation for graves from 1740, but who cares? The plague was never supposed to explain earlier graves, and the cause of the extinction at the end of the Cretaceous was never supposed to explain fossils from before that event. This is the worst straw man of science I think I've ever heard from anyone who isn't a flat earther.
Here's a guy, Jack Horner, one of the most famous paleontologists in the world.
And the guy who seems to want to make a Chickensaurus for some reason.
He wrote a book, and it's very, very interesting. Track with me carefully here, because this is a very important phenomenon.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Digging Dinosaurs is the title of this book, The Search That Unraveled the Mystery of Baby Dinosaurs. So why would Jack bother to write a book about a mystery about baby dinosaurs?
Because baby dinosaurs are small and fragile, and so much less likely to fossilize than adults, so for a very long time we had only guesses about dinosaur hatchlings and the nesting habits of dinosaurs. Jack found one of the most exceptional bone beds ever found, and it included not just infant dinosaurs, but also nests. The very fact that he wrote the book should be an indication of how unusual all this is, as most fossil sites don't ever get books written about them.
Well, here's what he found. He found a stretch of a bone bed of Maiasaur bones, which are these creatures maybe 20 to 25 feet tall.
More like 8 feet tall, but who cares about accuracy, right? They were about that long, though.
Big, huge dinosaur creatures.
They were more specifically hadrosaurs, which are sometimes called duck-billed dinosaurs. And one thing I always liked about hadrosaurs back when they were around is that they liked and subscribed to the channel of smart dinosaurs such as myself. So why not be like a hadrosaur and like this video and subscribe to the channel?
That stretched 1.25 miles east to west, so it was going in a certain direction.
It did stretch in a certain direction, but his actual citation doesn't say that. All it says is that it stretched 1.25 miles in a particular direction, without telling us how big it was in any other axis. Which means that for all we know, it stretched 5 miles along north to south. Dan needs to learn how to actually use quotations. If you want to quote someone as supporting some conclusion of yours, it behooves you to actually quote them doing so, rather than them not doing so and then just saying that they do. Even if they actually do agree with you, no one will take you seriously if you can't cite them actually doing it.
It stretched over a mile long.
Yes, 1.25 is indeed more than 1. Dan gets a gold star for knowing which number is bigger. I'm sure his mom will be very proud and put his report card on the refrigerator.
And he found 30 million fossil fragments in that area, stretching over a mile.
Neat, but is there a point to all of this?
We had discovered the tomb of 10,000 dinosaurs. Okay, so Jack found a herd. It's 10,000 dinosaurs. They're Maiasaurs. They're the same species, so it's an entire herd, and they're stuffed and buried with mud, but there's a mystery that he wrote this book about. There is no youth found among them. No juvenile dinosaurs, no teenage dinosaurs, no baby dinosaurs, no nothing.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it.
Get on with it!
For some reason, this herd of 10,000 adult Maiasauras were booking it, trying to get away from something, and they ditched the kids.
Let me guess. A flood. Because if any flood ever happened in the ancient past, it's actually Noah's flood. Because until written historical records began, there had only ever been one flood, and it was global. Is that the logic we're going with here? I feel like it is.
All of them. So what on earth could do that? Probably a scary event. A really, really scary event.
This guy beats around the bush, doesn't he?
Because every single one of the 10,000 dinosaurs they found were between 9 and 23 feet. All the kids were washed away and gone. And they found all kinds of traumatic things. They found leg bones that were split vertically from the trauma. They were hit, blenderized, deposited, and with lots of mud on top of them. Over 1.25 miles long. And America is filled with mysteries like this.
But it's not, though. At least not for most definitions of filled. These types of finds are exceedingly rare. That's why when they are found, such as here, or in Dinosaur National Monument, or ashfall beds for a far more recently deposited example, they become famous.
But it was significant enough that Jack wrote a whole book on it saying, yeah, whatever killed these dinosaurs here, they're missing all their young. So, and if you know how animals behave in the stampede mentality, you can look at a wildebeest in Africa, and they're trying to run away from a lion. They'll run through a crocodile-infested river, and they don't even care. They don't care about where their kids are or anything. They're just trying, the adrenaline triggers, and they just go.
Is he just not going to mention the nest site that Horner also found? You know, the one that made this whole endeavor famous? He might not, since it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a herd of dinosaurs to make nests in the middle of a violent flood that, according to Dan, blenderized the adults. It's also not clear how a nest could even be preserved in such an event.
That's exactly what happened with this herd trying to get away from something right in the middle of America. So when we consider dinosaur taphonomy and we study these dinosaur bones...
Yep, he's just going to skip over the whole point of the book. I guess it was inconvenient for him. And that's a theme with creationists. They love to skip over inconvenient evidence and data, and only cherry-pick the stuff that at least superficially seems like it helps them. Dan just did it with a whole book.
We have to have something, some mechanism that would explain how they're buried.
And a flood is certainly an option, except that it looks like it was actually volcanic activity that caused it. Also, I don't know where else to point this out, but these dinosaurs are also not part of the Morrison Formation, but rather the aforementioned TooManyDemons Formation. And the TooManyDemons Formation is mostly fluvial, with the bone bed in question probably forming on top of a low-elevation, low-relief fluvial fan that is an area near where a river enters the sea and fans out into a delta. In this case, an inland sea. At this time, North America was divided into a western section called Laramidia, a western section called Appalachia, and a northern section called Hudsonia. The TooManyDemons Formation abutted the sea and was on the western section of North America, Laramidia. The TooManyDemons Formation is also known for frequent paleosols, that is, fossilized soil layers. Soil is not just ground rocks, but it is also full of organic debris, tunnels left by animals, roots, nitrogen-fixing bacteria, etc. It's not something that can form overnight. It takes years and even decades to form. The fact that there are multiple layers of soil preserved in the TooManyDemons Formation means that the whole thing cannot have formed within the span of a year or less. It takes orders of magnitude more time than Dan has available to make each soil layer, and there are many of them in the formation. Like virtually every sedimentary formation on Earth, the TooManyDemons Formation absolutely precludes a global flood as the cause of its formation.
Because here is the second greatest thing about dinosaurs and how they're buried and how it supports the flood.
I don't remember there being a first one, but okay.
Many places around America, not all, but in many places around America, these dinosaurs are buried in three products, in a matrix of three products: mud, sand, and ash.
Three of the most common elements that make up sedimentary rocks. Wow, next he'll tell us that most sodas are made of water, sugar, and carbon dioxide. Of course there's also lime, silt, and other materials, but yeah, those are common.
So we need something, some mechanism that could bury these dinosaurs in layers in mud, sand, and ash. What on earth can do that?
Volcanoes, rivers, lagoons, floods, swamps, the sea, the wind, etc. And we have examples of all of those causing fossilization.
Well, we think Noah's flood is probably the only explanation that can account for these three different products.
All of those things are around today, and last I looked outside, my home in Tucson, Arizona wasn't covered in hundreds of feet of raging floodwater. In fact, yep, I just checked again to make sure, and while it's currently quite cloudy and it rained recently, the ground is very much not underwater. Yet there is sand here all over the place. There are even rivers on occasion. I've been to volcanoes and seen the ash layers they produce within historical times. I have not personally been through a flood, but I know people who have and have seen the aftermath. It leaves behind a lot of sediment even when it's not worldwide. I've lived by rivers and the sea and seen them both erode and deposit sediment. Even here, the wind deposits sediment from time to time, and I'm sure after a long enough period, some of it could turn into aeolian sandstone. Literally nothing about mud, sand, and ash requires a global flood. Sure, they don't preclude it on their own, but it's not confirming evidence.
So we need something that can explain this trifecta of burial material.
Which isn't even a trifecta. Look at this famous fossil of Archaeopteryx. It wasn't buried in any of these. It was buried in limestone. Look at this famous pair of fossils, the fighting dinosaurs. While they were buried in sand, it wasn't waterborne sand, but rather a sand dune that was itself deposited by wind. Look at this trilobite from the Burgess Shale. As you might be able to tell just from the name, it's not in mudstone, sandstone, or tuff, or even tuffaceous rock. It's in plain old shale.
With that, let's jump in to the mechanics from the Bible and from geology about how Noah's flood went down, and I think it'll explain what we just went through or how these dinosaurs bought it and were buried.
I bet that despite his commitment to literalism, he'll ignore that the Bible says that the flood happened because the floodgates of heaven were open, which means, if taken literally, that God opened up holes in the firmament dome over the flat earth. He might even ignore that the Bible says that the creeping things, which is generally terrestrial invertebrates, were killed in the flood if they weren't on Noah's Ark. I think it might actually be the case that among people who care about the Bible at all, evangelical fundamentalist literalists might actually care about it the least. They certainly are willing to just twist and contort the text until it's almost unrecognizable, just so their dogmatic interpretation of it stays intact, in spite of the text actually contradicting them in numerous places.
So let's give an overview of the flood. It was a 371-day process, and interestingly, the Bible gives us all kinds of narrative about how it went down. Noah's keeping a diary.
Nowhere in Genesis does it indicate that Noah was keeping a diary, and the whole narrative is told in the third person, meaning it's very unlikely that even the authors of Genesis intended the reader to think of any of this as a first-hand account by Noah. That also means it's probably not the case that the authors intended their works to be taken as written by Moses, since stories about him are also in the third person, and the Torah includes a record of his death.
After 7 days, this happened. After 40 days, this happened. After 150 days, this happened. It's the most detailed, longest account of any event in the entire Bible.
Yeah, and the Silmarillion has detailed descriptions of all sorts of stuff. That's not actually very important.
Even the New Testament resurrection account. It's a very, very long account. It's deep in about 2.5 chapters.
Wow.
So we have flooding that happened. The ark even didn't get buoyant until day 40. So there was a lot of coastal and shallow sea flooding that went on for about 3 or 4 weeks. Then the flood didn't peak or zenith until about 150 days in. Then the water began to sheet off of the continents, first in big sheet flow, and that as erosion happened, it went into channelized cut flow.
Almost none of the stuff in this retreating phase is actually in the text. Let's just read it. It's not actually that long, despite Biddle typing it up. This is from the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition.
In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month of the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On this very same day Noah with his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons entered the ark. They and every wild animal of every kind, and all domestic animals of every kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every bird of every kind, they went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. The flood continued 40 days on earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters swelled and it increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. The waters swelled so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The water swelled above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, domestic animals, wild animals, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all human beings. Everything on dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, human beings and animals and creeping things and birds of the air. They were blotted out from the sun. Only Noah was left and those with him in the ark, and the waters swelled on earth for 150 days. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals, and all the domestic animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the great deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters gradually receded from the earth. At the end of 150 days the water had abated, and in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month of the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains appeared. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark he had made, and sent out a raven, and it went to and fro until the waters were dried up. Then he sent out the dove to see from him if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set its foot, and it returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put back out his hand and took it, and brought it into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again sent out a dove from the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So no one knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited for another 7 days, and sent out a dove, and it did not return to him any more. In the 601st year, in the 1st month, on the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked and saw that the face of the ground was drying. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry.
I would actually hazard to say that, if anything, the text depicts the receding of the waters as fairly gentle, not some kind of rapid channel flow that Biddle is describing.
You can see that Arches National Park in America.
And of course, no, the arches in Arches National Park were sure carved primarily by water, but in fact they are primarily made of desert wind-blown sand that itself folded after lithification, as can be seen in the stress fractures that generally form the seed of what will become a hole in the middle of the stone arch. You can't deposit wind-blown sand at all under a flood, nor is there time in 371 days for it to lithify, then fold, then begin to wear away in a slow enough manner to preserve the arch shape established by the folding. It's just not physically possible. All of these processes take time. The only way to rush this is to just invoke a miracle. But again, why then bother even talking about evidence of the flood? If it's all miracles, the evidence doesn't matter.
But that's an overview of the 371 days of the flood process.
So just water flows, therefore arches form? That's the overview? I guess I can't fault Dan for being long-winded in this section. I just wish he would actually get to points with brevity, and then actually make points and arguments that are designed to support those points. Instead, he mostly just waffles about nothing in particular, then glosses over important things. It's like he's a robot specifically designed to annoy me.
Well, how in the world did Noah get all the animals onto the ark? Now,
I don't care how he got them on the ark. I'll just give him whatever mechanisms he wants, including miracles. This question is like asking how Superman launders his suit if it's invulnerable, as if it's the most unrealistic thing about Superman. I have so many much more important questions, like how is it that photons power him, but only the right photons? What's special about the wrong photons or the right ones? If kryptonite is so bad for Kryptonians, then how did they manage to come from a planet made of the stuff? What actually provides lift when he flies? What are his bones and muscles physically made of to be able to withstand the forces they're subjected to? How does he manage to lift things away from himself that weigh more than him without falling over, since that would shift his center of gravity pretty far away from himself? What actually emits the lasers from his eyes? Does anyone know that that's not how X-rays work, and so we need a whole new explanation for his ability to see through things? It's like with the Ark. There are basically infinitely many more absurd problems with the flood story than how Noah got the animals on board the boat. How did they survive the heat? Why is there no geological evidence for any of this? Why do the genetics of basically all life not show a bottleneck in line with the flood story, etc., etc.? How the animals got there is so far down on my list of concerns that it's barely there.
In a debate presentation once, and the person thought he had got me because he says, well, look, you can't put 1.5 million animals on the ark. It's case closed because there's 1.5 million species alive today. You can't do that back then, so Noah's flood must be a fairy tale.
Oh, so this is not how did Noah get the animals on the ark, it's how he fit them. And the answer is obviously going to be kinds. I don't really care, except that kinds is a completely made-up term with no actual referent. And I do think I want to talk about that, but let's see if that's really where he goes with this. And if it is, we'll probably launch into a full kinds talk next time.
But that's never been the creationist claim. There's only about 3,000 different types of animals that were on the ark.
Yep, this is about kinds. So before we get into that, let's sum up the reasons we were given so far for accepting the flood. That there are only certain places in North America with non-avian dinosaur fossils, that the Chicxulub impact didn't even kill every dinosaur that ever lived, and that stone arches that can't be formed by a flood exist. That's a pretty pathetic list. Oh well, let's move on to kinds next time. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the mouth of madness, and if you did, then please hit like on this video, and tell me what you liked in the comments. If you didn't, then hit dislike, and let me know what the problem was. Either way, please subscribe if you haven't, and turn on all notifications so that occasionally, YouTube might tell you about my content if they feel like it, regardless of your wishes. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Van Tovend, Furgevara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Max Cherry, North Texas Fossils, John Ackerman, Strawberry Vein, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, Elleron Teller, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostig von Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Sphincter of Doom, and Volus. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.